called Mentorship Saturdays for people looking to get into or level up in the software industry. I've also been an imposter my entire life. In this talk, you're going to hear a lot of self-deprecating humor, but I think I'm funnier than I really am, so it'll probably just be self-deprecation. Either way, it has a tendency to ingratiate the speaker with the audience by making me appear fallible, therefore making my opinions a little more honest. But I used it in my talk and actually in real life because that happens to be a manifestation of my imposter syndrome. I know exactly where and how big my holes are, and maybe if I point them out as quickly as possible before somebody else can, the exact breadth or depth of my gap won't be investigated. So before I get into imposter syndrome, I know what you're thinking. This guy has a tie. He runs a dev shop. How can he have imposter syndrome? So I'm going to go through some of my credentials. I was a pretty awkward kid. I wasn't quite sure how to interact with other kids. I definitely didn't have a very good group of friends to help show me the ropes. You can see her laughing at me. This is my second grade class picture of me wearing a white turtleneck with some tie-dye over it. I look like a hairy rainbow hippie turtle. It's possible I might have been trying too hard, but trying too hard was also a symptom of my imposter syndrome. I was decidedly not popular and not cool, so obviously I wasn't trying hard enough, right? When I transferred schools between 2nd and 3rd grade, I had some pretty interesting experiences. I was asked to meet some kids outside the park after school. I was pretty excited because I desperately wanted some new friends at this new school. When they circled around me and started pushing me, I assumed this was the type of game played at that school. I had 3 brothers, so I was used to roughhousing. Then one of them threw a punch, and I thought to myself, boy, this is a little rougher than I'm used to, but I started flailing back anyway. This continued until they just got bored and walked away. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that I was just sitting there willing to get beat up just to fit in. So I'd come from a Catholic school with drastically different curriculum and aptitude testing, and as far as I can remember, they were attempting to teach me how to read even though I already knew how to read, and I pretty much became a poster child for ADHD. So I heard about special education, and I really, really wanted that special education. So I asked my teacher if I could go. She was like, sure, go for it. I think she was happy to be rid of me. So the special ed teachers were nice enough to me for a few weeks until the open house came, and they quickly pulled my parents aside and said, he's not supposed to be in here, and we don't know why he's here. So I wasn't sure if I was a good student or a bad student. I didn't know where I was. So fast forward to freshman orientation. The year was 1992. Crisscross's jump was popular on the radio. A whole new bunch of people to meet. My attempts at getting in with my best friend who lived around the corner had fizzled as he was Vietnamese and his older brother's gang was particular about what Asian country you came from to be in the B-Boys. So I couldn't fake that. But I could get my hair braided, so I did. I thought I looked totally cool. After all, Crisscross were cool, right? So there was a group of people at the orientation who thought it was pretty darn hilarious, and I ended up hanging out with them for most of the school year. I wore giant overalls, backwards, constantly tripping over things, because I thought that's what people wanted to see. It took half the year before I realized I was actually the butt of their jokes and not part of their group. So that was the turning point for me. I was tired of trying to be all these people. Being an imposter is exhausting. So I took a walk and ended up playing some hacky sack with the rest of the outcasts outside. There were hippies, punks, and skaters. I had a skateboard, so I started riding more, and that's when I got my first actual imposter title of poser. I had arrived. So as you can tell from my earlier stories, fashion wasn't really my thing. In fact, fashion has always been an amalgamation of the things I thought people around me would like. It wasn't until I was well into my teenage years that I developed any personal sense of style. Clothes to me have always been like costumes. There are things you put on, and by wearing different costumes, you'll be given different properties. I always wear a tie when I present. Now I'm really into Halloween. Not for the horror or the monsters, but for the costumes. One magical day a year, I can dress as whoever or whatever I want and not be called an imposter. So I've talked a lot about me being a bad student, but I wasn't actually that bad at learning. In math, I would usually get an A because I would coast by on reading the textbooks and acing the tests, unless it was a teacher who required showing my work, which I hated and I found very inefficient, early sign of programmer. Those grades were a little tougher for me. But an odd thing about learning from textbooks instead of teachers is that you may tend to mispronounce a word or two. So at a meeting at Bonneville Power Administration, part of the Department of Energy, 4 years into my career as a programmer, I was still pronouncing the word integer as integer. So here I am trying to convince people that I know what I'm talking about, and I don't even know what an integer is. So now you're probably thinking one of two things. Wow, this guy really knows about imposter syndrome, or holy cow, is this guy pathetic? I had some interesting thoughts as I prepared to submit the first version of this talk for the first time. Am I really qualified to speak on this? There will be peers in the audience, and what if they know my journey and that I'm not a classically trained CS major, let alone a psychologist? What if they think I'm an imposter developer, and therefore my take on imposter syndrome is lousy? This wasn't just stage fright. I'm a clown by nature, so standing up here isn't tough. But imposter syndrome can pop up for anyone at any time. It does take confidence to ride a scooter with no hands. I'm very proud of that.
Whoa.
But I'll challenge anybody who thinks I still don't suffer from imposter syndrome. In fact, recently I literally just followed an internet tutorial on how to write a business plan. I think I have a great plan, but I had no idea if it was a good business plan. Luckily, the bank didn't even look twice at it, so no big deal. To further illustrate how much of an imposter I am, I'll be telling some stories about my own and others' recent episodes with imposter syndrome, and I call this disaster piece theater. So I was pretty excited to learn that I'd been accepted to talk at DevZiner 2014. I worked hard on my presentation and was really excited when the day came to give it. But when I stepped to the podium, it then took me about 10 minutes and some audience participation before I got the two screens working right. So I knew right there in my heart and soul that everybody knew what an imposter I was. How can this guy be presenting when he can't even work the projector? In reality, I was able to present on a new topic that didn't have many experts, and I was presenting something I had created myself. So why on earth was I doubting myself? Besides, everybody knows that most devs can't work projectors or printers anyway. So we'll also be getting a little help from Dr. Seuss as we go along. This book was written to inspire confidence in children, but I happened to pick it up and read it to my daughter the night I heard that Portland Code School had abruptly closed in the middle of classes. The fact that it had closed was very sad, but it was just another obstacle to overcome. Things happen, servers crash, databases get corrupted. As Dr. Seuss gave his advice to my daughter, I realized it was a great allegory for learning how to code. So it will be very cheesy, but we'll be reading it as we go along, and I've modified some of the words for our purposes today. Congratulations, today is your day. You're off to great places, you're coding away. You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes, and you can steer yourself any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you'll know what you'll know, and you are the person who will decide where you go. You'll look up and down tech stacks, look them over with care. About some you'll say, I do not choose to go there. With your head full of brains and your shoes full of feet, you're too smart to use anything that isn't quite elite. And you may not find any you'll want to use. In that case, of course, open source you will choose. It's opener there in the wide open air. Out there, things can happen, and frequently do, to people as brainy and footsy as you. And then things start to happen. Don't worry, don't stew. You'll just go right along. You'll start happening too. Oh, the places you'll code. Now that you've heard how much of an imposter I am, let's talk about imposter syndrome itself. So the Caltech Counseling Center has this definition on their site, and it can be summed up as feeling inadequate even though you have performed in that area before. So let's just take a quick second to read this. And raise your hand if you can relate to this description at all. Everybody. So who does it happen to? There seems to be an obligatory part on any writings on imposter syndrome where they give many examples of high-functioning people who suffer from it. But I'll just stick to this one for now. So let's read the quote and let it sink in for a minute. I'll go ahead and read it. The exaggerated esteem in which my life work is held makes me very ill at ease. I feel compelled to think of myself as an involuntary swindler. So this is Albert freaking Einstein. Research suggests that 2 out of 5 successful people feel like they're a fraud. And I bet dimes to dollars that that's much higher in development. A small disclaimer, this phenomenon was first identified in women entering the workplace in the last century. Most speculate that the doubt of women's qualifications was internalized by the women themselves, and while outwardly confident, the women entering the workplace suffered internally. So this talk will focus on imposter syndrome, specifically aimed at devs from my perspective as a male developer, and they've helped both male and female developers in the past, but I don't claim to be able to accurately speak to the full breadth of a woman's perspective on the issue. So the acceptance email I got for a conference I spoke at last summer went something like this. We accepted your talk even though you misspelled imposter in your entry. Holy cow. Here I am submitting a talk in which I've misspelled the most crucial word in the entire thing. My first thought was, this is going into my presentation. So as it turns out, you can actually spell imposter with an E or an O at the end, and the jury's still out on which is preferred, so I flip freely between them for fun and confusion. So before we go too far into the pep talk, it's also important to note that imposter syndrome is a sign of intelligence, not ignorance. It serves a valuable purpose in asking the base question, should I really be doing this? People who lack imposter syndrome will continually run headlong into walls, asking who put the wall there. So there's a scene from the movie The Other Guys in which the hero cops of the city are chasing bad guys across a roof, and the bad guys then clip onto a zip line and zip 6 stories down to the ground. So the hero cops, lacking any semblance of imposter syndrome, look at each other and one says, you thinking what I'm thinking? The other one says, aim for the bushes. So they then jump, and spoiler alert, the camera follows them all the way down to the concrete. Needless to say, they didn't make it. So even though I'm going to be talking about how to overcome it, it's important to be aware about when you're about to jump off a building. So here's an unattributed quote I found. Though traditionally perceived as an ingrained personality trait, imposter syndrome has more recently been studied as a reaction to certain situations. In fact, the open source development world in particular, sorry .NETers, where your work is peer-reviewed by other talented developers, is a notorious breeding ground for imposter syndrome. I happen to pick a profession where my mastery of a trade that hasn't changed in decades is easily measured and observed. I chose a career in which we were asked to do things that we've never done before over and over again. And naturally, that can lead to feelings of inadequacy. So you like how I breezed through the only code in this presentation much too fast for you to evaluate it? That's imposter syndrome. It doesn't help that the industry puts some pretty unrealistic titles and requirements out there, like ninjas, rock stars, and sorceresses. Has anybody heard a job description like this? Looking for a Perl Warlock with 10 plus years in Ruby, Linux kernel contributions, and experience doing isometric transformations in COBOL. It sounds goofy, but I've seen job postings like that. So in the early years, even the crappiest of devs, which was definitely me, were considered wizards just because we could do what others couldn't, pure and simple. But now people think of it much more as a commodity position. They still expect us to have the skills and proficiency of a ninja, though. So somewhere along the lines, they stopped admiring rock stars and started expecting them. So I'm a yellow belt in 2 different martial arts. That is one above I just started. I have played in a cover band, and I still do some sleight of hand coin magic. This does not make me a ninja, a rock star, or a sorcerer. So living up to these expectations is tough to say the least. You'll be on your way. You'll be making great sites. You'll join the high flyers who code to high heights. You won't lag behind because you'll have the speed. You'll pass the whole gang and you'll soon take the lead. Wherever you code, you'll be the best of the best. Wherever you code, you will top all the rest. Except when you don't, because sometimes you won't. Not everybody learns at the same speed. I like to think that my learning curve is a little like the first one. I can learn the basics of something very quickly, but it's actually pretty rare that I achieve mastery in something. And I've worked with others who seem like they aren't getting anything until some magical aha moment when everything clicks and their knowledge and confidence skyrocket. And it's important that we identify these curves within ourselves and with others and try to accommodate them. A good friend and old coworker of mine almost didn't make it when he started at the company I used to work for. Although we recognized his talent and knew that he'd have some ramp-up time with Drupal, the framework we were using, he struggled. He was the slow build skyrocket type. And on his side, he was completely terrified and told me that he almost gave notice 3 times because he was sure that he was swindling us. Then one day, in week 5, he hit his stride and started killing it. He then surpassed my back-end Drupal knowledge and is still way better than I am. That was Tom, by the way. As developers, we don't do cookie-cutter work. We are in the business of solving problems. It's actually rare that the problems we solve are duplicates of previous problems. In fact, even when the problems are duplicates, technology may have changed in the meantime, requiring a new solution anyway. I don't know about you, but I can't point to 2 sites or applications in my experience that were done the exact same way, because things simply move too quickly. So these are some ways and situations that could trigger imposter syndrome. Recognizing what your triggers are will help you combat them. Every project is a delicate, unique little snowflake that requires its own personal touches and flourishes. This can be fun, but it can also be very nerve-wracking. If we could simply pump out the same snowflakes over and over again, somebody would just automate it. I had a thought at one point that grid.io, it's a site that will take any content you give it and create dynamic layouts based on that, would put me out of a job. But don't worry, I've actually had that thought many times in my career. In fact, in 1998, I was pretty sure that Dreamweaver was going to let my son put together sites like Legos. But the reality is that as soon as someone can identify a grid.io site, the pitch will literally be, I want it to not look like a grid.io site. So we're constantly creating new things, and that can wear on a person. It may cause you to have thoughts like, why am I struggling? I've done this a million times. Or why am I not faster or better at this by now? The truth is, we are delicate, unique snowflake constructors, and no snowflake is the same. And estimating is hard. There's a reason it's not called exactimating. Estimates can swing wildly. I've worked with developers on how to get better at estimating, but there's no magic recipe. It's all feel and experience and breaking things down into smaller and smaller chunks. While I happen to fancy myself pretty good at logic problems, I can't tell you how long it's going to take me to solve one, as I am not aware of all the variables until I sit down to it. There can be a small dragon in a tiny estimate that completely blows the estimate out of the water, and there's nothing like spending 40 hours on a 4-hour estimate, but it happens, and in comes imposter syndrome. So you've completed that task. Awesome. Did you do it right? Did you follow standards? Did you follow the right standards? How does it look on a mobile device? Have you been sensitive to your client or customer or audience? There are multiple problems with these issues. For one, what is the bar and who is the authority? It's likely up to whoever your supervisor is, but is that it? Do other craftspeople on the project have opinions? What about the client? Standards can change from moment to moment, and obviously this can lead to feelings of imposter syndrome. So this quote by Hawking is pretty timely, as he recently redefined his own theory of black holes to say that matter can escape, albeit to another dimension. So if he can change his mind, we can probably change his mind too. This text is a little weird, I'll read it. One of the basic rules of the universe is that nothing is perfect. Perfection simply doesn't exist. Without imperfection, neither you nor I would exist. My first legitimate digital job was working as a production designer for a tiny agency that did a lot of screensavers. Tells you how old it was. 95% of my job was to Photoshop these photos so that A, any color casts were removed while maintaining the feel of the picture. B, they were sharpened in a way that you couldn't tell they had been sharpened. And C, that they had true white and black points set. My boss was a professional photographer before he was a graphic designer and was notoriously picky. So we're going to do a little exercise here. I have color corrected one of these slides, and we're going to vote. Raise your hand if you think it's the image on the left. Wow. Raise your hand if you think it's the image on the right. That's never happened before. But it doesn't matter because I don't remember which one it was. The point is that it left me feeling, it was subjective work that left me feeling like an imposter every day. Sometimes I get a little overzealous and over-sharpen or whatever, but 90% of what he would correct was simply subjective. So this one's near and dear to me as I recently transitioned from development to management over the past few years. I left a position where I had amassed a great deal of knowledge and respect and traded it for a brand new career in which I had very little experience. All of a sudden, I was brand new again. I kept calling myself a junior director, hoping people would cut me a little slack. I struggled mightily in the new role, even though I was providing the leadership and the mentorship that was required of me. It wasn't until I looked back and realized that it was me and my set of skills that had gotten myself promoted, and I just needed to be me and not try to live up to whatever imaginary Dan Linn director of development I had in my head. So now we're going to go over some ways in which to deal with imposter syndrome. A number of these came from an article written by Kyle Eschenroder entitled 21 Proven Ways to Overcome Imposter Syndrome. I've omitted some, expanded on some others, and added my own, and I have no idea how we actually proved any of those, but it was a good read. So the number one best way that I've found to overcome imposter syndrome is to simply say, this is imposter syndrome. In fact, if you can just get yourself to say out loud, I think this might be imposter syndrome, chances are you're going to feel a little better. So we're going to do another group activity. Let's all say, I think I have imposter syndrome on 3. Not 1, 2, 3, then say it, but 1, 2, then say it. I'll do project management. 1, 2, I think I have imposter syndrome. That wasn't too bad. So talk to somebody you trust. Hopefully this person is somebody who will not just tell you what you want to hear, but hopefully they'll tell you the truth. And likely the truth is that you're being too hard on yourself. If no one is around and just saying it doesn't help, Start talking to yourself. I know this sounds silly, but it's a very well-known technique in development when you're stuck as a developer to talk to a rubber duck or other such totem. I have a little clown on my desk that I talk to. Basically, you just need to talk out your problems sometimes. To illustrate that, I had a client who would call me up and was always very long-winded. He'd go on for 5 minutes about the problem he was having, and then 9 times out of 10 he'd say, oh, well, shoot, I guess all I had to do was that. And he'd solve his own problem, and we'd be done. So I just started not answering his calls and sending him straight to voicemail where he would just solve all his own problems, and I don't think I ever talked to him again. So we are not perfect, and despite job descriptions to the contrary, we don't and can't know everything. Maybe at one point you could, but no longer. I've accepted that my lack of a formal CS degree hinders my ability to work on low-level architecture. Although I've written a Java app before, if I barely knew what I was doing, and I'd probably be in trouble if I actually had to manage more than one memory thread. But that's fine. I simply look for help in those areas, or plainly state that I might not be the best for the job, but I'm happy to give it a whirl. And I also have gray hair since my 20s. I also have a condition that my friends have coined that is called, excuse my French, asshole listening face. Apparently, yeah, I get that. Apparently, when somebody's describing a problem to me, I make a face similar to this gentleman, and in my head I'm thinking, wow, that's a really hard problem. I wonder how I'm going to help this person with that. But apparently it comes off more like, why is this person talking to me, and when are they going to stop? So now that it's been identified, my wife knew about it all the time, apparently, I try to combat it, but it's a known thing, and I'm just constantly working on it. Sure, I suck at memory management, and machine code is about as foreign to me as it is to my dog, but I've also been a leader in some other areas. I was doing cool stuff with Scriptaculous way before jQuery was cool. I remember tables and layers, and have even used the Zoom CSS property on purpose. I have skills in many intangible areas. You know what I'm talking about. I have skills in many intangible areas that make me a very valuable developer. So when I'm faced with a problem that has me temporarily stumped, I try not to beat myself up too much. I'm sorry to say so, but sadly it's true, that crashes and hackers can happen to you. You'll get all hung up in a prickly perch and your gang will fly on. You'll be left in a lurch. You'll come down from the lurch with an unpleasant dump, and the chances are then that you'll be in a slump. And when you're in a slump, you're not in for much fun, for unslumping yourself is not easily done. So I'm a full stack developer, but I tend to lean towards the front end. A few years back, I thought it'd be a great idea to get a VPN and start hosting some sites. I know how to configure Apache, I can do virtual hosts, how hard could it be, right? So for 6 months, this server just printed money for me, and everything was great until I got a call from a client saying that their emails were being rejected. I had been hacked, and I had been blacklisted from all the email servers. So I was thrown into a complete panic. I went through the server checking every process I could. I learned all I could about IP tables and firewalls. Finally, I offered a friend of mine, Dylan, to come over and help me take a look at it. Luckily, he only charged me a 6-pack. So while I was sitting there beating myself up for thinking I could do something like this, he was actually admiring the sophistication of the attack, in which they had hacked a mail server into the SSH client, making all those processes look like legitimate SSH logins. So here I had been sitting, I've been sitting there thinking that I had no business hosting sites, which is still debatable, but in reality, I'd just been out-hustled by somebody who makes hacking into servers their job. And once I realized that and came to that conclusion, it was very easy to move on. We are all different, and the same skills that make me a good developer may not be the same set of skills that make you a good developer. If I was constantly comparing my skill set with somebody with a CS degree, I'd probably go crazy. Not only did they sit through 4 years of in-depth computer science training that I didn't receive, but they actually have a piece of paper that says they can do it, which is a segue to the next point. I don't mean to offend anybody with this, and obviously I'm biased not having a degree myself, but having a degree does not automatically make someone better than someone else. Knowledge is important, but so is creativity, ingenuity, and experience. I can't count the developers I know with unrelated degrees or no degrees at all. Your employer also chose you for a reason, probably lots of reasons. Unless you completely lied in your application and in the interview, those reasons are valid. So don't discount people's opinions of you. Sure, they're tinted through their own lenses, but those opinions are important and you need to recognize them. So here's a trailer that resonates with me. In this trailer, you see everyday people faced with extraordinary circumstances where it's easy to just give up. But instead, they become Batman and overcome their obstacles. Here's why Batman resonates with people. He has no superpowers. He is just a human. Granted, he's insanely rich, a martial arts expert, and a weapons inventor, but still, his greatest asset is his mind. We all have the capability to dig within us and find our inner Batman. Over the years, I've actually learned how to embrace stressful situations and sublimate the stress into a kind of frenetic energy that fuels me. It was basically the realization of the old adage, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So be the Batman. Apologies to LeBron fans, go Blazers. Babe Ruth struck out plenty of times. Sorry. LeBron is regarded as probably one of the best players in the universe, but he has lost plenty of championships. Missing shots and even losing are part of any game, and in reality, part of life. We would be nervous wrecks if we were expected to do the exact right thing at the right time every single time. So stop beating yourself up. You will come to a place where the docks are not marked. Some words are highlighted, but mostly they're dark. A place where you could sprain both your elbow and shin. Do you dare to stay out? Do you dare to go in? How much can you lose? How much can you win? And if you dive in, should you turn left or right in 3/4, or maybe not quite? Or go around the back end and sneak in from behind? Simple it's not, I'm afraid you will find, for a mind maker-upper to make up their mind. So I was recently helping OMSI with the site rebuild. Not having the necessary budget for the project, they asked if I could just architect the site and guide their dev through the project. So I led them through 14 weeks of agile development with everything going well, and then 2 weeks before the expected live go date, a major issue came up on their calendar, the main feature of their site, as a showstopper. Turns out that using Drupal views to query a date range on a multi-value field collection was a little tricky. So I tried a new method, and the pager stopped working. Tried a new method, different problems. It was so weird that I finally actually asked a friend of mine to come take a look at it and give me some help on it. In the meantime, I had to go back to my client and explain that while everything had gone swimmingly up until then, their timeline was no longer valid. So talk about imposter syndrome. I'd been hired to do something, and I was now hiring others to do that very thing. Luckily, I'd had about 15 years of imposter syndrome experience before then, so I was able to deal with it pretty quickly and subconsciously and move on. It was one line of code. It was a group by clause on my SQL. Don't have regrets, because you don't want to be on your deathbed saying, boy, I sure am glad I gave up on X because I couldn't have handled the success. Probably not. So dive in and take risks and be adventurous and courageous. This is my friend Slavko, who just got certified to jump on his own out of planes. Probably not the best example for me, though, because I'm never jumping out of a plane. You can get so confused that you'll start into race down long rabbit holes at a breaknecking pace and grind on for miles across the weird hyperspace, headed, I fear, towards a most useless place, the waiting place. For people just waiting. Waiting for a train to go, or a bus to come, or a plane to go, or a program to compile, or a new version to show, or the phone to ring, or the snow to snow, or waiting around for a yes or no, or waiting for their hair to grow. Everyone is just waiting. Waiting for the client to bite, or waiting for the wind to fly a kite, waiting around to deploy at night, or waiting perhaps for their rich Uncle Jake, or some angel funding, or a better break, or a string of pearl, or a pair of ampersands, or a bracket with curls, or another chance. Everyone is just waiting. So what's the best way to dive in? Just do it. Take action. I wish I could get back all the time I spent on the top of the half pipe with one foot on the board, too afraid to put my other foot on the board and jump in. And you know what it finally took? Absolutely nothing. It took me putting my foot on the board and diving in. So stop overthinking and do something, because doing something is contrary to feeling like an imposter. No, that's not for you. Somehow you'll escape all that waiting and staying. You'll find the Git repos where Google is playing. With banner flip-flapping, once more you'll ride far, ready for anything under the stars, ready because that's the kind of person you are. So I wish I didn't identify with this as much as I do, but it's completely true. I've been completely over my head hundreds of times. If I go back into my dropping in analogy, if I would have simply tried it, I likely would have succeeded on my first try. I had never done it, but I had the basic idea of what needed to be done. I simply needed to do it, or at least try. So you may notice that I wear a tie a lot. This is absolutely me faking it till I make it. The most widely recognized way to truly overcome a bout of imposter syndrome is to write. Write what you're feeling. If you can't do that, write gibberish. This isn't my preferred method, but they say to let the negative thoughts flow out of your pen onto the paper. But even more importantly than writing when you're down is writing about your successes. When you start to get down on yourself, you can then go back to this journal of successes, and after a while, I think you'll be amazed at what you've already accomplished. So I started seeing a new doctor a few years ago, and the first appointment was very revealing as she sat me down and asked me to go over my entire history of all my injuries and sicknesses. So as I was recounting all my stories, it started to become clear to me that I've had a lot of head injuries, like double digits. Although I suffered from weird head and neck pains, it had never really occurred to me that I'd had that many head injuries. All it took for the realization was to go back through my history and remember those. But had I kept a successful journal of successful injuries, I would not have to do that. Oh, the places you'll go. There is fun to be had. There are tests to be run against the newest JS fad. And the magical things you can do with that code will make you the winningest winner you know. Fame. You'll be as famous can be, with the whole wide world watching you win on TV. Live coding is a sport someday? Maybe? Except when they don't, because sometimes they won't. I'm afraid that sometimes you'll play lonely games too. Games you can't win because you'll play against you. All alone, whether you like it or not, alone will be something you'll be quite a lot. And when you're alone, there's a very good chance you'll meet things that'll scare you right out of your pants. There are some down the road between hither and yon that can scare you so much you won't want to go on. So let's talk about how to take some of these ideas and put them into action. When writing this presentation for a developer-focused crowd, I came up with the idea of test-driven personal development. So there's a concept in development called test-driven personal development. It's kind of a backwards approach where you write the test first, and you know it's going to fail, and then you write code to make that test pass. So if we can take an approach like this to our failures, then maybe we can bypass the imposter syndrome and just get to a resolution. So as we go through this, you may notice that it's pretty much a gimmick. But our mind is playing tricks on us, so it's only fair to do the same to it. The basic steps are just what you'd expect from test-driven development. Identify the problem, run a test if you already have it, otherwise write it and run it. So before I show the flow chart, I'm going to mention one final bout with imposter syndrome. I've been asked to modify this presentation for a general audience for years, and I figured this would be a good year to do that. So when I was accepted to talk at San Diego Drupal Camp in April, I took the opportunity to finally pull the trigger and rewrite it. So I started to rewrite it, and that entailed a massive amount of introspection, which led to an enormous amount of imposter syndrome. When San Diego came, I could have been ready, but I wasn't. I gave my usual developer-focused speech. When it came time to give it for the first time at an agency, I actually called in sick. I was a little under the weather, but it wouldn't have been the first time I had presented with a little illness. In reality, it was my imposter syndrome. This presentation needs more polish. The graphics need updating. My flowchart needs to be redone. I can have more sources, or I can just do it. So let's have a look at the flowchart. It starts with a problem that I've written a test for. The test reads, as a developer tasked with updating a color, I want to clear the caches so that I can review my changes. Read through the imposter lens, this reads, oh my god, all I had to do was update a color, now the site is broken, white screen of death, what the hell is a segmentation fault? I'm going to be fired. So we run the test, and of course it fails, but maybe we get an error message. So we Google using the test keywords and any error message text. If we don't get any results, we start using our Google foo and try to search again. Keep doing this until you've gotten no results for at least 3 or 4 times. Once you've actually tried 3 or 4 times and you still didn't get results, then maybe it's time to look for new ideas. Some things to try if you ever find yourself in this spot, which should be rare. Maybe you're barking up the wrong tree. Maybe reevaluate what has been done or what needs to be done. Maybe your test just needs a rewrite. Maybe you need to ask on Stack Overflow or come to Mentorship Saturdays. Or maybe you actually have to pay another professional to help you. I've only done that twice. You heard about both of them. The much more likely scenario is that you do get results. Maybe you don't find a silver bullet like, yes, exclamation point. Maybe it's more like, yes, question mark. Either way, rejoice, for you're not alone. So you got results. Does that mean that you can now fix it? No. Can it even be fixed? If not, then you'll likely need to find a new solution. Or maybe it's just out of your wheelhouse and it's time to go back to your other resources. but maybe you're now able to fix it. So you fix it, and you make sure to keep your test and your notes for your journal of successes. So this process takes the emotions out of it while allowing us to simply take action, one step to the next, keeping moving. After a few iterations of this, you should start to internalize it and have an internal framework for dealing with hard imposter syndrome situations. At the end of the day, there's nothing novel about this flowchart. It's just a way to force you to take action and record your successes. You could put, as a homeowner, I need to mow my lawn so that my neighbor stops complaining. And this process would help you get that done, and eventually you wouldn't even need the flowchart to mow your lawn with confidence. But on you will go, though the weather be foul. On you will go, though your enemies prowl. On you will go, though the hack and cracks howl. Onward up many a frightening creek, though your arms may get sore and you still support IE. On and on you will hike, and I know you'll hike far, and face up to your problems, whatever they are. So now that you've mastered your own imposter syndrome, let's try to help some other people. I've seen people act out in numerous ways due to imposter syndrome, and helping these people is often done case by case. And let me clarify that it isn't always imposter syndrome that causes these things, but it definitely can be. So if you're a manager of the person, it should be easy to get someone some one-on-one time to directly address it. But what can you do if you're not a manager? So these are some behaviors I've noticed from people suffering from imposter syndrome. They can be protective, they can be very overcautious, even overconfident. Panicked is pretty common, and frozen is extremely common for imposter syndrome. So the first thing to do is try to earn a little trust. I usually look for something I admire about their work and ask them if they'll tell me about it or how they came up with the solution. This is basically just kissing their butt, but this is a crucial first step in what a mentor once referred to me as the art of the shit sandwich. You can't just walk up to someone and say, hey, what's your deal? But once you're on their good side, you can actually point out the behavior. Hey, I've noticed you're a little defensive about your code reviews, which I very quickly follow up with a compliment like, you're rocking this stuff, so why are you worried? The final piece of the sandwich is kiss butt. So kiss butt, say the bad thing, kiss butt. So this often leads to, have you heard about imposter syndrome? And an explanation of it. Ultimately, they will more than likely be grateful for the feedback. The most important thing to do for people with imposter syndrome, besides helping them identify it, is to praise them. But praising them in the right form is important. Some people need to be recognized in front of their peers. Some people need to be praised in private. Just be aware that giving praise in the wrong context for them may actually have the opposite effect and actually magnify their imposter syndrome. Like, my boss won't even tell my other coworkers about my achievements. They must not believe me or believe in me. So finally, remember to tread lightly. You're telling someone that you think that they are an imposter. And if that's not delivered properly, you could accidentally just come off as calling them an imposter. These are feelings, not code, and patches are much harder. So just a few recap points I'd like to make. You don't suck. This is just part of life, and we all get it. Identify how this happens to you and when, and how to see it coming. Keep a journal of successes to remind yourself of your accomplishments. And finally, the show must go on, so keep on trucking. You'll get mixed up, of course, as you already know. You'll get mixed up with many strange libraries as you go. So be sure when you step with care and great tact. And remember that life's a great balancing act. Just never forget to be dexterous and deft, and never mix up your right floats with your left. And you will succeed. Yes, you will indeed. 98 3/4% guaranteed. Kid, you'll make applications. So be your name Buxbaum or Bixby or Bray, or Mordecai Ali Van Allen O'Shea. You're off to great places. Today is your day. Your application is waiting, so get on your way. Thank you very much. So this is the part where I ask if anybody has any questions, and nobody raises their hand because nobody wants to ask about imposter syndrome. And then I'm going to turn off my computer, and you're all going to start lining up right here. So instead of doing that, if you could be so kind as to ask your questions now so the whole room could benefit from them, that would be awesome.
I just want to say that when you said that you couldn't talk about like the experience of like the woman, like you said you can speak on only on your perspective. I'm really grateful that you said that. That was really cool.
Thank you. All right, no questions?
Oh. I'm trying to find one.
No questions is okay. That just means I answered everything already.
What do you think is a good question to ask?
What do I think is a good question? A good question that stumps me repeatedly, I don't know why I'm giving this to you, is how does imposter syndrome show up in other careers? I've spent a little bit of time in design too, and for me it was a lot of those same symptoms that I listed, but it was much more the overconfidence in other careers. So people would try to pass off bad work by talking very bigly about it. Yeah.
So how would you frame the concept of imposter syndrome to guys straight out of code school? Like, there's how much we know or don't know, and like, you know.
There's this feeling you will get when you're working on something that makes you think, what the hell am I doing? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this.
Oh, no. I can identify it. I know I've had it before. I know what you mean. But we're kind of at the application, like, I don't know, advice for, like, you're in the interview, how many years have you worked with blah? Like, you know.
That's a great one.
Yeah, like.
Yeah, so I do tell people to be confident about what you know and also be confident about what you don't know. People will smell that stuff out in the interview, and if you're just rambling and babbling about something instead of just saying, oh, I'm familiar with that, I haven't had a chance to work with it yet, you're going to come off badly.
I'm familiar with that, I haven't, that's the bad thing to say.
No, just saying I'm familiar with that, but I haven't had a chance to play with that.
That's safe.
Leave it at that. You know, if you try to talk about a technology you haven't used before, that's going to be found out pretty quick.
Yeah, right.
I appreciated hearing your story about the business plan that you talked about. I had that exact same experience.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Well, unless there's, oh yeah.
What was your background? How did you end up in coding?
How did I end up in coding? My dad was a musician, and I saw him not make money being creative. And I knew I wanted to be creative, but I knew I didn't, and not dig ditches, but I also really, really wanted to make money. Graphic design, Photoshop was coming up when I was very young, so learned Photoshop and parlayed that into a job teaching Photoshop. And then somewhere around then, I realized I was crappy at design, and web was getting big there. And it was kind of a natural move into, actually I did a quick stint in animation for a while, Flash animation, and then from Flash animation and ActionScript, I moved into JavaScript, and then Java, .NET, more hardcore programming languages. Yeah.
At what point from moving from a non-coding career into coding did you start to feel, and you say you still have imposter syndrome, but start to feel like that was more behind you and you could actually start to feel confident in what
My non-coding career?
Yeah.
I didn't have a non-coding career. I mean, I waited tables, so I was very excited to be coding. Yeah. One thing I will say about people transitioning from one career to the next is don't throw out all the skills and experience that you've garnered over the years. That's all very valuable stuff, and it all informs your next position. So don't just throw everything away that you've done before. It's all very, very valuable.
Oh, that leads to a great question. So let's say you're recruiting, or a guy like me who's come from somewhere else. For me, it's been teaching, but what sort of things are kind of the top? I mean, of course you want what's genuine for that person, but what are some things that go like, okay, yes, I'm glad you're bringing that from your previous career?
Soft skills, number one. I'm done trying to figure out people's personality quirks. So if you already know how to be in a business and work, I'm all for that.
Okay. So good, and the word soft skills is starting to feel pretty generic at this point in all the discussion.
Communication specifically.
Like just being professional, talking, and like acting like a grown up.
Yep. Making your commitments. Yes. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap that up then. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.